Good morning, good afternoon, good night, good day, good whatever time it is. Hello and welcome to Laravel Microservices. So, I wanted to talk today, this week actually. I've scheduled 5 streams all around microservices in Laravel. Let's talk about why, should we, shouldn't we, when would we. Let's build something and let's actually see and find out ourselves. So, hello from Guinea. We're going to be building out a warehouse and distribution system. We're going to be looking at stock levels and products, pushing them out and shipping them to clients, fulfilling orders. We've got 4 services in this design where we've got a client service, where we're going to be focusing on clients and their orders. Realistically, we could split that out into 2 different ones. So we've got a client service and an order service. We'll look at if we want to do that later on because it's not our initial one that we're going to work with. We're going to have a catalog service, which is all about the products and the stock. An identity service, which is focused on like users and access, basically. And then our distribution service, which is all focused on taking an order and fulfilling that order itself. So the plan is to build a warehouse distribution system focused on shipping physical products from our warehouse to our clients so that we're fulfilling our orders. Communication between our services is eventually going to be handled by RabbitMQ. We don't need it initially, but we will look at adding that later on so that we've got a bit more of an event-driven approach to our microservice architecture. And our authentication state is actually going to be handled by Redis in the middle of it all. So typically you could use an API gateway so that you've got an authorizer on the gateway so that you can authorize every request coming in. That is a slightly different microservice architecture to what we're doing here. So what we do have is a diagram that I lovingly threw together. I'm going to hide my face so you can see the screen and focus. So there we go. So we're going to have our identity over here, which can talk to Redis and store things in the database, their database. Then we're going to have our client with their own database, which can also talk to Redis. Our distribution with a database talking to Redis, and then catalog with a database talking to Redis. So everything's kind of built around isolation. Time to look at someone code while I code. Yes, it's the best way. So RabbitMQ currently isn't connected. The reason for that being we need to see where the communication needs to happen, not just assume it always needs communication. There's going to be scheduled jobs going on, dispatching jobs in different areas. We need to look at what communication is needed and where, why, and when. So let's move on. The design. We've got a client service, catalog, identity, and distribution. I've got a few resources available here. So running multiple sale apps locally with Fleet. I did have a play with that over the weekend and it did not quite work the way I would have hoped. So I won't be using Fleet, unfortunately. There's a really good blog on the Twilio website called What is RabbitMQ and What Do You Use It with Laravel? So I'm going to share this link. This will be quite useful for some people. I'm going to show that as well. So that's a really good tutorial going over RabbitMQ and Laravel, what it is, why you might use it, and how to use it. The only downside that I found with this tutorial is that it does require a Cloud AMQP account. And I want to avoid that. I want to avoid doing tutorials where you've got to pay to get access to complete it. It doesn't make sense from a tutorial perspective. So I'm going to probably avoid using that and look into that on the side while we're building. I also looked at something like temporal. Could we use something like temporal to utilize different architectural patterns like Sargo and other things like that in our services so that we've got really good kind of failure mechanisms built in. So our client service, we're going to have a couple of paths. We're going to have clients register, client orders. Data modeling side, we're going to have a company, client, and a member. My internet seems to be having its 10:30 wobbler. Maybe I should start rescheduling these streams. So can I zoom in on this? I can't. So most annoying part about Notion is that I cannot zoom. So we've got our company information here. We've got client information. All of this is basic data modeling. That is all going to be kept within the client service. Then inside the catalog service, we've got products and categories. That is our main focus here. We've got our product data model, a category. We're going to have a warehouse because this might be a distributed warehouse system. We could have warehouses in multiple locations where certain products are kept in certain warehouses. And then we're going to have suppliers as well. So nice and simple. So we can look at a management console later if we want to. Then if we come back, we've got the identity service. You know, we've just got something really basic going on here for login, register, managing the account, looking at the roles, editing the roles if we need to. And finally, the distribution service, where we've just got an order item, and a shipment. So this isn't concrete yet, but basically an order could be split over shipments. It could be, you know, from an operational perspective, we want to add, you know, we've got space for half of an order to go onto this shipment so it gets there earlier. Yeah, unfortunately, multiple Laravels because one isn't enough. Exactly. So Jeffrey, I cannot actually zoom. Let me try. Nope. Because of my keyboard, I don't have a command and a plus available at the same time. So unfortunately, I cannot do that. Otherwise, I would. But we're not going to be focusing on this much. We are going to be focusing on actual code and building and doing stuff. So for this, I'm going to be testing out OrbStack. I installed it this morning. I don't need Linux, but I've got some containers. I've got things set up. This is meant to be a better version of Docker desktop for Mac. So I will drop a link for that a little bit later so you can kind of see what OrbStack is. But so far, so good. Come over to our code. I've got a big old repo. We've got one repo for the warehouse distribution. We've got our main Docker Compose, which contains Redis, and that is it so far. I've got a template service in here. Here's my root here. So then I can just come here and say open in terminal. I'm going to rename this to template. So then if I serve, hey, failed opening. Okay, so I haven't composed or installed everything yet. I built this on my laptop and I've just pulled this across this morning. While that's downloading, I'll have my coffee and see if there's any questions. So it's quite interesting. I mean, microservices, I kind of see them as more of an anti-pattern. Do we need them? Not always. Do we want them? Sometimes. Is Laravel great for microservices? It depends. It's really, there's no real answer to should I use microservices in Laravel or Laravel for microservices. It depends on your service, depends what you need. You might be better off with a good monolith. You might be better off with not using a framework. If all you're doing is accepting a request and storing some data. You can do that in standard PHP with a couple of libraries, wrap it in Bref, and away you go. You don't need a framework all the time, especially as you get to serverless and microservices. It starts to get to the point of, well, let's build it in what we know and let's refactor it to what we find out. So I've got a template repo here. All I've done so far is delete the front end assets. All of that's now gone. I've come over to the providers, the root service provider. I'm only using the API routes. Let's make that static. We got that standard one there. Rate limiting going on there. What else did I do? Nothing in app, nothing in auth yet, nothing in event yet. I've updated the user model so that we've got ULIDs. I've deleted the remember token because it's not going to need it. Yeah, Laravel's amazing, but it isn't something I'd use for absolutely everything. You use it where you need it. We've got a role at the minute. We've got a user, warehouse user, a manager, and an admin. Super basic stuff there. Console. No, nothing's really been done yet. There's no controllers. There's nothing like that. So let's get started. Let's build out our first service. So we kind of want to copy our template. We don't have to kind of create a whole new one. And we're going to call this one identity. This is probably the first one I'd start with. Because what we want at this point, yeah, Lumen was quite good for microservices, but it misses so much that you get out the box with Laravel that is useful. Octane, for example. If I could put Octane on Lumen, my God, that would be fantastic. Because Laravel's router is not designed for this, for microservices. It's designed for something with a lot of routes that it's going to have to match against. Whereas with your microservices, typically you've got maybe 1 to 2 routes, which means you don't need all of that stuff. The amount of logic typically found in a microservice is quite small. Do you need that massive DI container? Do you need to bind everything? Do you need to do all of that? Or could you maybe get it done in 60 lines of code? This is going to be a journey. Are we going to be building microservices in Laravel? Yes. Should we be using Laravel for microservices? Maybe not is the answer. But we're going to follow along on the journey. Framework X probably would be a good solution for a microservice, to be honest. I definitely think that would be useful. And what I might do, if I have time, is build a couple of alternatives not using Laravel so that we can have a look at this and see what's going to work. So now that I'm in identity, let me just do a quick update on this. Let's come down to our composer here. That's not a huge deal there. I need to copy.env a key generate. Is that going to work? Yes. And a serve. We have got a server. Open in work. So now we have got, let me keep that open for a little bit. We've got one here, one there, slightly different ports. It's not the end of the world right now. I'm not going to do any sort of local orchestration. Yeah, white background IDE is great. What theme am I using again? Appearance. I always lose it. Code editing. I can never find the theme. Color scheme. Photon. I'm using Photon at the moment. I believe that is one by Brent. who works at JetBrains used to work at Sparsy. So yeah. So as I said, we've got our root directory over here. This has simply got services and our Docker stuff. So it's just got Docker so that we can spin up a Redis instance without using it locally. Then a directory for all of my services. Then I've got my template repo, which I don't actually need to run. I'm using it more as a kind of, so we've got it. Let's close that one down because it's not needed now. This is the identity. And what we will do is, let's go make sure that it is going to work the way we need it to. So let's just identity a config clear a serve identity. There we go. We've got an identity service up and running. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you don't need a framework, and it as a Laravel fan, as someone who's very passionate about using Laravel, that's a hard pill to swallow. Excuse me while I drink my coffee that my wife lovingly made me. So what we want on here is we've got a database stuff set up. Let's go make sure that, we've got SQLite. So let's go migrate our database. Migrate. We're good. We're keeping all of that default Laravel stuff in there for now. We might trim that back a little bit later on. So we've got a users table available. In our routes, we're going to want to have a way to kind of control this. And at this level, I'd probably just have things done like this, where it is all just done in line, it's all in one place. You can control the microservice without having to dive through everything. I don't use Laravel Valet. I have used Docker or PHP Artisan Serve. I mean, if I built more sites more frequently, I'd probably use Valet, but I do so much varied stuff that Valet can get in the way. So we've got a post route to log in. That's great. And what this will do, at this point, we will validate the input, fetch the user record, store the API token on Redis, return a response. So I'm just going to turn my fan on in the background because I'm turning into a bit of a hotbox in here. If you can hear the fan and it's distracting, please let me know and I can turn it off or something. But right now I am getting rather warm. So the idea here is that when we log in, when we register, we create a kind of an access token, and that access token is then pushed up to Redis for storage that other services can then check against. They can say, okay, give me this. Is it a valid token? Is it valid for this user? Can they perform this action? It's all stored on Redis. At that point, things are great. Redis can have expiry. You don't have to look at expiring tokens because you just set the expiry on Redis and it disappears. It's gone. You don't have to worry about mess. And for a simple example, it is perfect. I'm not saying it's the most secure approach, but what I am saying is that it's a handy approach for educational purposes. If I was to build an API gateway, I'd do something slightly differently, but I'm not. I'm building a Laravel application using microservices because that's what people want to see these days. There's not a lot of information out there. So we validate. We create user record. We store the API token on Redis, and then we return a response. So let me zoom out a little bit so you can see the two almost side by side. There we go, perfect. So we've got two main endpoints right now. I'm not going to use Laravel Breeze. I'm not going to use Jetstream. I'm probably not even going to use Sanctum at this point. I just want to accept two requests, login and register right now. That's my first two. And what I want to do with those is just take them and test them. So let's look at testing. What I've done in PHP unit, I'm not doing feature tests or unit tests. I'm just going to do direct testing against what I'm building and doing. So here's my test suite. Fan is okay, thank you. It means I'm not going to sweat loads. So it's complaining about test case because of how I've set up the repo. So we've got everything within here. What we're going to do is I'm just going to create one in the root folder here and just go login test, and then we're going to create a register test. So we've got two tests going on here. So login, what are we going to test against to do? We want to make sure that it validates the user's input. No brainer, right? What else do we want to test against? We want to validate that it's not as disrupting as me hearing your thanks. If I don't angle the fan at me, it'll still cool down the room and you shouldn't hear it so much. So we want to validate the user input. We want to then, it returns the correct status if credentials are incorrect. We also want to then go through and say, okay, so it will store an access token on Redis or in cache, really. We want to talk about cache because the way Laravel sees Redis is cache or as a database. You're picking on me because you work with me, Chris. That's all. That's all it is. It's workplace banter. So it will return the access code in the response. That's kind of everything we need. Then if we grab that, it's very, very similar on here. So it returns, so we validate on registration. It creates the new user record. It'll store the access token in cache and it will return the same response. So the only difference between the two is this part. It's creating a new user record and checking credentials. Those two parts are the only difference between logging in and registering when it comes to our service here. Validation rules aside, of course. So I'm going to hate writing it like this, so I'm not going to. I am going to put it inside controllers, even though I don't technically need to. So we're going to make a controller. We're still stick it in an auth directory just so it's kind of out the way there. Login controller. We're going to make this invocable. We're not going to need a pest test because we've got one. There we go. And then we will also create the register controller, or as I call it, the registration controller. Then we will make a request, login request, and the registration request. Fantastic. We're getting somewhere. So I always keep that there. That's almost like a health check at this point. Is my app up and running? I'll just add something like this for fun. Right, so login. Login controller. I'm still going to add a name. I know I don't need it, but it will trigger me if I don't add it. Registration controller. Then let's simplify that one and add their name here as auth register. We got 2 routes so far. That's kind of all we're going to want at this point. So let's close all of those. Come over to app, HTTP requests, login request. Right, let's fix this up. It's final. It's never going to be extended. We want strict types. Always want to authorize at this point. That is not a bad way of doing it, actually. That's a good comment there. Writing test and then doing it. I'll think about that for next time. So we're going to have an email. It's going to be required. Should be a string. Ooh. Should definitely be an email. We don't actually need string if we're doing email because I believe email will check that is a string. It will validate that part of it. I will max it out at 255 for any ridiculous email addresses. Passwords. This is where we just need to say that it is required and that it is a string. Actually, we don't even need to do that on this one. We need to do that in the registration. So there's our login request. Nice and simple. Auth, login controller. We don't want to extend that. So we can delete that. We're not going to use that request. Stick like that, strict types. Make this final because we need it that way. And then login request. So we validated. The next thing is check credentials. Store API access token. Return a response. So that is our order of doing things. Why do I use root names in API? Because it's just something that I've always done. If I'm really honest, you don't need them. But if you wanted to add full JSON API support, you're going to want to include links, and linking to things using root names is a lot easier than string parameters and paths. So check credentials, store access token, and return a response. What I am going to do quickly, I'm just going to start a quick tinker session because I did notice something. So illuminate support facades cache get test null. Perfect. No, it is connecting. It is working. Perfect. Actually, I haven't updated my env. 2 seconds. Cache driver. Redis. Now a config clear. Hey. Come back to Tinker. No, that's still working. Perfect. So what we're going to want inside here is when we log in, we're going to want to use the auth guard and some sort of Redis connection going on here. Now we can do all of this in line if we want to. It's true by default, is it? Come here. I did not know that. That is super handy for me because it means my code is going to be even smaller. So it just needs rules right now. Thank you for that one. I can't pronounce your name, so I won't try to butcher it, but thank you. So that is that. A login controller, we want to check credentials. So in a usual ski fashion, I will use the dependency container because we've got one. Use it. Private read only, factory, auth, check credentials. This auth guard attempt request only email password. We want to throw an exception at that point. Fantastic. We should have logged in at that point. So then we can create API access token based on authenticated user. And when we create it, we want to store it. So what do we want to do here? At this point, we could return an API error response, or we could just throw an exception. For now, I'm going to throw an exception. I'm going to call this an authentication exception for now, just to keep it simple. I will explain that the auth factory momentarily. So we've got authentication exception. So here, let's just throw a new authentication exception where the message is invalid credentials. But what I also need to do is composer require treble API tools, something that I built, which is quite useful. So then I can say that the code is status invalid credentials is probably unprocessable content at this point. It's failed validation. It's not a, you could do something like a bad request, or you could do an unauthorized, but unprocessable content makes a lot more sense. Check function passes authorization. So the auth factory, let's get back to this. Before that, I'll make that read only. At this point, so the auth factory is basically, so if you use the auth facade, for example, what this is going to do is it's going to give you the auth manager or the session guard. It's going to give you one of these, depending on how you have logged in. Basically, supports basic auth, stateful guard, extends guard. It's basically just going to give you authentication out of the box. Now, I could use the facade, say auth attempt this. Oh no, that's not good to hear, Jean-Marc. Drop me a DM, I'll help you get that sorted. Also, double check the version of Treble installed, because by default, Packagist seems to only give you 3.0. You've got to manually upgrade. Let me check, actually. I did try and fix that this morning. So if I do a quick composer require treble Laravel, yeah, it's forcing a 3.0, whereas in reality, what you need is 4.0.33, I believe. So, yeah, it will come through, but you do have to, force it at the moment. I'm looking into what's going on with Packagist, so I do apologize. Back to this. Yeah, I could use the auth facade. It wouldn't kill me. Yes, it probably looks simpler, but by using the auth facade, what you're doing is you're shortcutting to the container to say, please give me the the loaded authentication factory in effect. So by injecting it, I'm just skipping that step and saying, I know I'm going to want this. I don't have to tell you to give me this. I'm going to inject it, so I've got it. That's all I'm doing there. I'm kind of stepping around any sort of alias lookups, and I'm just saying, I know I need it. Just give me it when you create the class. I don't use facades often. I use facades mostly for cache and for HTTP calls. About it right now. So we've got a login. At this point, we should have a logged in user. So create an API access token based on an authenticated user. So we don't actually have to store this locally on the auth on the identity service. We just have to push this up. So this could be a simple string at this point. What I would do personally is, let me just close all of those down because it'll get in the way. I would create a services, I don't know, access token service, something like this. It's going to do what I need it to do. I'll have a think about any constructors that I might need. And then I'd go something like public function. I want to create a new access token, basically. I'm going to pass through a user because I know I'm going to need it. And I'm going to return a string. So we've got a user coming through. This could just be a standard model. We're not going to discriminate on this. It could be either. So we want to, at this point, what we want to do is create an API token, store in cache, return the token. That's literally all we want to do. So we could be really basic with this and just say, string random, I don't know, 64. Store it in cache, return token. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with doing this. It works. But I kind of like the way Sanctum creates their tokens. So if we come down to new access token, personal access token down here, there's a way it can be done. Find a token, can, can't. Oh, where is it? It might be, I might have to look on the user model. So come over to, it has API tokens, create token, here we go. So this is how it creates a token. And it's really, I find it quite nice. I like the way that they create their tokens. They return a new access token. It works in my mind. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of replicate this to some extent. So this is going to be our token. We've got the user coming through. What I'm going to do, I'm not going to pass through the model. I only want a user because I'm going to access something on it. So create the API token. So that's like the raw token at this point. At that point, we've got a raw token. It's kind of cool. It works. Then what they do is they pass that. They pass the ID and this. So through this constructor, this is the actual access token that they have, which turns into like, you know, user ID followed by the token itself, which I like because then on the lookup, it's using that as a lookup and then that to match it, which it's quite interesting. It's quite useful. Do we need it though? Not in a distributed system. User IDs are, not. Oh, do we need them? No. We need to pass it so it's accessible, so that we can kind of look at things. But that's about it. So here's a raw token. We're just going to call this token. That's going to tell me that I can just inline it. Not interested. So what we want to do, the next step is say cache put. The key is a plain text token. And it's actually the plain text token that we want to return. The token, do we actually need that? Let me rubber duck it with you for a moment. So we make the request, we create the token, we store it, and then we return it. What we want to do is the integration will take that token as an authorization token, make a request to a service. It will receive that token and look it up. So we need to only really pass back this plain text token. Hashing it isn't actually doing us any good at this point. In my mind, anyway. So there's a token, there's a token. The value that I want to put in is user get key, and the role is user get attribute role. That is what I need in there. Cache put TTL. So what sort of expiry do we want in this? Realistically, when I create a token, I'm going to want a couple of hours. So if I do cache, I just create an expiry enum quickly, which is going to return an int. So we could have case hour is 60 minutes. Wait a minute. TTL, I can never remember. Does TTL, does that do add minutes? It does do it in minutes. I think. Can never remember. Actually, let's just delete that. Let's not make it complicated. Let's just do a now add hours 5. No, we're just going to default to 5 for now. That's stored in cache, and then we can return. So we can take this access token service, come over to our login controller, inject it, you can say token equals this service create where the user is this auth guard user. That's going to have a type issue, but we can worry about that. Authenticatable or null. And then we just want to return a response. So return a new message response where the token is the token. Why is that complaining? Oops. Message is token. Right. So this can return a responsible. It does potentially throw an exception. At this point, this guard user attempt, what does attempt return? It returns that. How could I get around? I'll come back to that part. I'll have a look at what we can do. Maybe we could, I don't know. Authenticatable, maybe. I'm not 100% sure how to get around that nicely without causing issues. So we've got that going on. Let's test it. It validates the user input. It validates user input. We can do a request and do a post JSON. The URI is action login controller. Data is nothing. Assert status. Got 2 different ones available. I'll use a clever one. Unprocessable content. Assert JSON error, validation error 4, key, email, assert JSON validation error 4, password. That is our test. Just clean all of that up. And let's just quickly retest. Hey, one failed. So no API key configured. Let me remove treble for now because I don't need it at this second. I'll be adding that later. Remove that. There we go. We've got one pass. We are validating the user's input. So next, it returns the correct status code if credentials are correct. So we can say user factory create simplify that one. Then we're going to grab that and set that status code is okay. That's all we need to do. So email user attributes email, and by default the password is password. Run my tests again. All looking good. It will store the access token in cache. So for this one, we want to start off with expect cache. We're not going to have a key. That is the problem. So we can't do like a before check. What I would do is response for that. Let's grab make a user. At this point, I should have a response, and I can die dump, make sure I'm getting what I need. Yep, I'm getting a token. Fantastic. Expect cache get response. You haven't done that quickly. That is giving me test response. Here. Let's quickly down dump the response. It's going to die because of this. Let's just get this working. If I go response JSON, give me the message. If I do that, I should get the text. So if I grab this and do a lookup on the key for that, oops, expect that not to be null. Now let's see what happens. We're good. We've got that in cache. We could probably not to be null to be array, maybe. See if it's an array. It should be stored as an array. Yep. To have keys, you can just verify that it's storing the correct things. So we want to make sure it's got ID and role within there. Make sure that is working. That is good. So it will return the access code in the response. So let's grab this. We kind of just tested that because we've just used it, so we can actually delete that. And there we go. That is login tested. Close all of those. Our next endpoint is registration. Registration. Delete that. Declare my strict types. Make this final. So when we register, we want a name. Required. It's a string. Min of 2. Max of 255. We're going to want the email. which is required. It's an email. It's unique for the users. The password, again, required. String. Password. Default for now. I'm not sure if default gives you confirmed, but it's not vital at this second. So here's my registration controller. I can delete all of that. Declare my strict types. My identity service is getting there. Registration request. So what we want to do, we have, at this point, we know we've got something valid. We've got a valid user or valid request. It feels like a waste to create a whole query just for this. Access token service. Maybe I should call this authentication service or something. Refactor, rename. Authentication service. And we're going to refactor this name. We're going to rename this to create access token. Done. And then we're going to say public function create user. This is going to get an array of data, and it is going to return a user model. So at this point, public function, I can use a constructor. Private read-only. I want to pull in the database manager. Database, and here I will return this database transaction where the callable is user query create data. Callback. Callback. There we go. User query create. What we can do to enforce this on a type level is use an array shape and say that name is a string. Email is a string. Password is a string. That forces that one. We can add attempts on this one, so we could say we want to attempt it twice. This should give us a user back, or it will give us something that is throwable. This can then be a read-only service. So here we can then pull in the public function construct private read-only authentication service as service. Make that read-only. Our user is then going to be this service create user data, so name, request string name to string, email request string email, that's a string, and password make value request string password to string. It gives us a user. Token is then going to be this service create access token where the user is user, return new message, response, data, message, token. And for this one, we'd want to update the status code. Can't type already. So status is then going to be status created. To do remove inline variable, transform. We want to do that. Oops. Basically, there we go. This will return something that is responsible. This could potentially error. So for this, we will try to create a user, catch any potential exceptions, and handle it ourselves. We're going to create a new exception. That's an authentication exception. Kind of want a, we'll use the authentication exception right now. So throw new authentication exception where the message is failed to create user account. The only reason I can see this failing at this point is going to be internal. So we can use status internal server error for that one. And the previous, we can just pass the exception along. That will give us all of that, all of this, and this should now work. So we can come down to our registration test and say, let's test it validating the user's input. So post JSON, the URI is the registration controller, and the data is going to be empty. Let's just sort this out. Assert status, where the status is unpostable content. Assert JSON validation error for name. And we can kind of repeat that. We're going to have the name, email, and password. So let's run our tests. So far, so good. It will create a new user record. So then we can say it creates a new user record. We will just say expect user query count to equal 0. And after we've done our stuff, we'll do a 1. So simplify that. Then we can just do a quick post JSON, making sure that it actually passes. name, test user, email, test at identity.com, password, something like that. Before I go too far, I do want to make sure that the database is set up correctly. Yep. Test again. Looking good. We want to make sure that it stores the access token in cache, just like we did on the login. So we can pretty much grab this, replace that. Don't want to do that. What we want to do is go to the registration controller, say that the name, we can grab the same payload actually. Grab that. Once that has gone in there, we've got a response, and we want to make sure that the cache facades come back and does what it needs to. We are good. We've got 6 tests with 19 assertions. We know that we can log in and register at this point. So what I would do is commit that, git add, git commit, identity, service, login, and register. Done. That is all of that done. So identity can be collapsed. Next, let's look at maybe like a client or something, because yeah, let's say client service, register orders. Let's go to the client service. So client, copy all that across and see what's going to happen. Exciting times. I'm going to put do not disturb back on, just in case I get bombarded at work. Do some real-time dev. Jean-Marc, it is you I'm talking to on Slack as well. Right, so now we've got a client. What I will do is I will stop running that one, come over to here, and we're going to open this one in our terminal. We're going to call this one client, so we can start building out a client service. So first thing, we want to copy our environment across. A key generate. If I then come down to database, we don't need users, but we are going to keep them. Password resets, no. Personal access tokens, we don't actually use. We'll keep the users table. Just unpicking the users table is a bit of a nightmare at times, I'm not going to lie. Make sure this is connected correctly. Cache, Redis. So come over to here quickly. Mounts. You've got a mount, that's good. So when a request comes in, we're going to come over to this route here, app name, we're just going to call that client. So now if I just quickly do a serve again, we're now on the client service. Next step is, let's look at our modeling. We're going to want to model our data. So let's move Notion over to here. Client service, we're going to want a company, client, and member. So a make model, first thing we want to do belongs to company. Company needs to be created first. Company, migration and a factory. Then we are going to have client. Then we are going to have member. So we've already got role copied across. That is good. So let's come over to our database, migrations, companies. So let's sort out our companies table. Declare some strict types. That should be static and return void. This should have a UL ID, primary key. So company has a name and a website. Right? I'm keeping it really basic for now. I'm not going to do anything too fancy because focus of this is on the microservice aspect, not on the actual logic. So some of the logic might be slightly wonky, but the process is what we're caring about right now. So we care about the model being the company model. Ooh, not that one. And all we've got is a name, so we can use faker. Yeah. Okay. This faker company website is going to be this faker. Is there a company website? No, company email. So we're just going to say URL. That's what we care about there. Company use has ULIDs. What we will do actually is add emails. Table string email unique. So we will actually want an email on that as well. We want to spell that correctly. Email this faker, and we were going to want a company email. We are going to want that to be unique. So this can also then be notifiable, fillable, name, website. I spelled it wrong again. Oh dear, email, and that's all we care about at that point. Company. Now we can work on client. We'd look at my connection. I've had no issues all weekend. I think it might be my machine. Heartbreaking. I need a new machine. All right. Name and email. That's all we care about right now. So table, string, name, table, string, email. This should be unique. Table, foreign ULID for the company ID. We will index that, we'll constrain it. and we will cascade on delete. It's going to have one membership, but we can work on that later. Now I can come over to the client, factory, name, email, and company. So we've got separate databases going on, which is fine. It's more typical with microservices. Not needed, possible. This faker name, email, this faker unique company email, name, email, and then the company ID. We will just use a company factory. That's all we need. So the client is going to be, has UL IDs, and use notifiable again. Let's make sure, yeah, I did do that. So fillable, we have name, email, company ID, public function, company belongs to, turn this belongs to, whether related, company, and foreign key. What is going on there? Something funny went on there. Then public function clients, many, turn this has many, something funny will happen there with the auto completion, but hey, that is life. So clients, company, all done. Next is membership. Create members table. Declare static, return void. Primary, and what we want is a role table string role default role user value. Do that, and then we just need the foreign keys table foreign UL ID for the client ID with index, constrain, and cascade. You can use, yes, so you could do that, but at that point, when you're doing user in random order first, you're creating a new user. Whereas in my factory here, for example, if I did create, and if I passed a company through to the client factory, it would create two. I'll show you. Let me connect up the database on this one so you can see. Let's get some learning on. Developer, GitHub, just Steve King, warehouse distribution, services, client, database. Haven't created it. Damn it. Cancel. I need to make the database first. Okay, let me just quickly migrate and then I can show you. Yeah, create it. There we go. Now back to where I was. Where was I? SQLite. Database SQLite. Open. Let's connect it. Let's go look at this database quickly. So, companies, none. Come over to Tinker. So if I app models client factory create, if I create, what I'm going to see is a new company by default. But what happens if I just truncate this? Can I quickly truncate tools? Truncate. Make sure there's nothing in clients quickly. So, nothing in clients, I have got one company. So now, if I go back to Tinker, if I go app models client factory, and I want to create a new one where the company ID is app models company first key. So basically what I'm doing here is I have got one company. I know I've got one company. If I want to create a new one using the factory, passing through a company that I've created in my test suite, for example, this, well, it still used to be triggered. So this would be passed through and assigned, but this will still be executed. So now if I come to companies, I've got a new company created. Where's my client? Should be pointing WXH. It's still pointing to that first one. So this was created for no reason. However, if I just use company factory, run the same thing again. So now I've got two companies. I've got one client. I should now then have two clients and one company, two companies still. I should not create an additional company at this point. I do not create an additional company, but I do have my client. So it just means that you're not duplicating data, creating lots of extra data for no reason in your factories. So just be aware of that one when you're doing this. If you're doing a lookup or if you're just doing, creating within here, just pass through the factory and it will be evaluated if it needs to be. Back to where I was. So we've got a company and a client on the member. So if we come down to our member factory quickly, make that final, declare some script types. Member, we have got a role, client, and company. So role is going to be role, user, client ID. We can use client factory, company ID. We can use the company factory. What I typically then do is public, hey, that's not public, public function role, where I pass through the role So I can return this state. The state is going to be a static function. It has an array of attributes. I'm going to return an array. And within that array will be the role that I passed in. There we go. That is useful because it means I've got a default membership role, and then I can override it in my tests when need be. So that's our members. I can then come over to here and say that it has ULIDs, fillable is going to be role, client ID, and company ID. This one needs a cast. So the role is cast as an enum. Then we can add the public function client. Which belongs to return. This belongs to the related is a client, and the foreign key is the client ID. Then we've got the same thing for company. So we can swap this over and say company, make sure that's spelled correctly. Company ID. So client, public function, membership. We're going to say has one. Return this has one. Whether the related is a member, and the foreign key is the client ID. Company has many members. So public function members has many. Return this has many. The related is a member, and the foreign key is company ID. So that's all hooked up relationship wise. Migrate fresh quickly. All of that is now connected, all hooked up. So when we come to our data modeling here, we want to be able to register clients. So come down to our routes, come down to our API. We're going to do a route prefix clients as clients group. We're going to do this all in line here, not like I usually would do where I split it off into separate files, because we're not going to have the complexity here. So we can do a route post for register name, register a new client. We're going to have actually, we don't even need that as a register. We can just do that as a slash. This is very cruddy at this point. We want to be able to get all clients. So we're just going to call that list. We want to list them. We want to create them. We want to be able to update them. And then we will add the delete. and delete them. So that's all of our client actions. Then within clients, we're going to want to be able to get specific orders. So we'll be saying things like root. We could probably do this as a prefix. ULID group. Drop in a static function. So let's say we want to do get orders list. I don't use API resources. I like invocable controllers. It works for me. You can do whatever works for you, but this is a pattern that works best for me personally. So we're going to need some middleware to check the authentication state. So make middleware service authentication. So if we come over to our middleware quickly, client middleware service authentication. Let's just do this and let's just talk it through. So first thing we want to do is, does the request have an auth header? Yes or no? If it does, is this token valid? And it's a simple yes or no. Yeah, so I mean, I could pull, that's a very good point. So your definition of a microservice, you'll have one service for each resource. So in theory, I could pull orders out to its own service, and I will look at that. I'm not going to complete this today. What I'm going to do is just talk through this middleware, and that's probably it for today. And then I'll have a think about if I want orders to be its own service before tomorrow. Realistically, it could be. There's nothing wrong with orders being its own entity at this point. So, do we have an auth header? If request has header authorization. If we don't have an authorization header, we want to throw a new authentication exception where the message is, I don't know, please include your access token in the request. Something simple like that. We'll pass back the code. Actually, does it accept code? Guards, direct, no. Guards, and it's going to say API. Let's see what that does. So if we don't have an authorization header, then just slow. Is it a valid token? So we need to extract the token from the header. Then we want to check the token against our cache. Then, at this point, we are good to go. So, extracting the token from the header. The token should be string of. The string we are going to use, request header authorization. We've got that. And what we want to do is after, what we're going to search for is bearer space. And we want to make sure that we cast this to a string. There might be a nice, easy way to do this. But doing it, breaking it down like that, and very specific. I don't know if there's like a request headers, if there's a way to like get an auth header specifically. So I'm just going to do it this way. So next we want to check the token against our cache. So if cache get token, if we don't have it, we're going to throw another authentication exception and say invalid authentication or something. This is basic at this point. Otherwise, yeah, we're good to go. Let's return that next request. No, perfect. We are good. We've got that running now. So down here, that's Laravel's default auth. We're not using that. What we can do is just say like service auth and do like service auth. Service authentication. Well, that will bug me being there. It needs to be down here with the S's. So there's our service auth. So down here, what we can do is middleware service auth, done. Now we're going to authenticate against that central repository that we have going on with our cache and say, once I've authenticated Silver token there, my next request I should add my token to and send it through to the next client. That client can then take that request, check the headers, get the auth header, check it's valid and it's in cache, it's not expired in cache, and then it can get the user ID and the role to do authorization within itself. That is a start. I'm not going to do much more today because I have a million other things I have to get done today. So, conversation going on in the chat around using invocable controllers and API resources. So the general consensus is that some people prefer to have an action for each controller, for each request. So the way that I like to see this is that, I'm going to show my face for this bit so you can see the passion. So the way I like this to work is that every request that comes in should map to a class. It makes sense. The request that comes in goes to this class and only that class. It's focused. There's nothing else confusing you as you look at it. So if I created a resource controller and I routed things to the API resource controller, I'd open up the controller and be like, right, where did I put that method? Go down to that method, look in the logic. Am I using any shared methods? Am I not using shared methods? It's forcing me to spread my logic up and down the file. Whereas the way that I do it with an invocable controller is that everything is there. The only external logic that might not be in that one logical invoke block is being pulled in from a dependency injection perspective. So that I've got a centralized point of my constructor, and then I've got my handling it itself within the invocable part. It keeps things really clean for me. That's how I like to keep it anyway. Kind of solid. It's, single responsibility. This class, it's only responsible for this one thing. It's not responsible for these many things. It's responsible for this one thing. Although you could argue that it's the single responsibility is CRUD actions on a resource. So it is kind of a null argument almost with it being single responsibility, but it also isn't at the same time. It's definitely an interesting conversation to have. I personally like those invocable controllers because it's one job. It's handling one request. I know that request goes to that class. There's no looking around in that class. It's there. If I need to look at anything else, it's going to be, in something that is injected that I can then use my IDE, click through to go see, find the specifics where that business logic might live. Because my application should care about is taking that request, pulling it into a specific controller, routing the logic out to somewhere where I keep my business logic, handling that business logic, and returning a message back to my end user. It's just marshalling requests in and out and going, okay, cool, I've got this request, we're good to go, we validated you're allowed to do this, send it off here, here's your message. Keeps it clean. So tomorrow, what we're going to do is we will pick back up with these API endpoints here, and we can have a conversation around orders. Should it be its own service? Yes or no? Some say yes, some say no, some say it doesn't matter. Is it a microservice? Is it a macro service? Or are we going service-oriented architecture here? What are we focusing on? Because there's a blurry line between each one. Blurry line between that microservice and that macro service. Are we doing one thing, or are we doing one business function? And then service-oriented architecture. Are we doing something that can be encapsulated within a larger service, which is, if you don't know what service-oriented architecture is, it's basically a collection of APIs that can all talk to each other, and you just make the requests where you need them. It's like a beefy version of a microservice or a macro service. It can be used as a standalone. It does multiple things, but it's headless. It's a service that you can go to. So yeah, let's pick this back up tomorrow. Let's carry on this conversation. Would I use Laravel for microservices? It depends on the size. Is it a big service? How small is my service? Is it taking one request, mapping it to a controller, handling the logic and storing it in a database so it can return a response? If that is the case, no. It would be like getting in a car to drive 100 meters down the road. Why not walk it? Pull in something smaller, pull in something lighter, pull in something that you can just go, you still use Eloquent, still use aspects of the Laravel ecosystem if you want to, but you don't need the full framework for something that small, because you've only got one request. You don't need a router. Do you need dependency injection? Not likely, because it's one function, one logical bit of code that's coming in. But you got to do what you're comfortable with. So without further ado, I'm going to go make another coffee. Have a good day, evening, night. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you think. If you want to go into more detail on another episode, I've set out 5 episodes because I didn't know how long it was going to take to build and kind of communicate a lot of this and what other people would want to see at the same time. So drop a comment below around what you'd like to see, what you might want me to dive into more detail on from kind of a microservice perspective. Do you want to see me do something outside of Laravel with one of the services so that you can kind of see the difference? If so, let's do it. Let's take the time now to kind of think about what you want to see as people who tune into my channel. Other than that, have a good day, stay awesome, and I will catch you all next time. Goodbye.